Hello, friends, and welcome to episode number 14 of Nostalgia Talk. Man, 14, my lucky number. I'm James, and today on Nostalgia Talk, I have someone with a very, very cool career, Lewis Henry Mitchell. Hey, Lewis.
Hi, how you doing? Good to meet you.
I'm not bad, and you?
Yeah, doing great.
Now, Lewis, can you explain to our listeners what it is that you do?
I draw and play with Muppets. That's what I do. But my official title is the creative director of character design for Sesame Street. Even though Sesame Workshop is branching out into other areas, other shows and things like that, my focus is Sesame Street. So I kind of stay in that world, which I love, love, love that. And what it means is I draw the characters, I direct photo shoots, which means that I pose them for the photo shoots. I call it a still performance because I'm still performing them, just not with my hand inside of them. It's like an external performance. I also designed all the new Muppets that have come out, not all of them, but most of them. And I guess the most significant one I did is Julia. We could talk about her later on. But I've done quite a bit of work there. Whenever the Macy's parade balloons came out, I did those. I designed the float wherever they've been using that float for.
Sweet.
Yeah, they've been using that same float forever. That once I designed that one, they fell in love with it, and they won't. I updated it for about 4 years. When I did that one, they said, "No, that's the one." Yeah, so I really do a lot of a variety of different things. I've traveled several places in the world. I do a lot of teaching and training. I'm considered one of the ambassadors of Sesame Street, so they send me out to do public speaking for them on an official basis. So it encompasses a lot of things, but the bottom line, I hang out with, play with, draw the Muppets, the Sesame Street Muppets.
Hmm. Nice. So, how did you get interested in design?
Well, it's not so much specifically design. I just wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be the best artist I could be. And I was studying people like Norman Rockwell. And, when I was a little kid, I discovered Jim Henson on the television show. And when I saw that, when I saw it before and he came out, I didn't really care about him because I didn't know who that skinny guy with the beard was. When he came out and he still had Kermit on his arm, that's when it dawned on me. A man was doing that. And it just flung me into this wonder world, man. It just charged me into this new place and awakened the things that were already in there, but it took Jim Henson to just say, ignite them. And from there, I just kept drawing and kept trying to make my own puppets and all kinds of stuff like that. And eventually, I realized that I could design. It wasn't that I was aspiring to be a designer. Because again, when you're an artist, I don't think you're really aspiring to any specific area. You just want all your chops to be as high level as possible, so that way, whatever comes to you, like I didn't know that I could design a Macy's parade balloon, but I had the chops to draw, understand, composition, proportions, things like that. When I designed new Muppets, or when I did the photo shoot, I did not know. I wasn't trained for that, but I bring the sensibilities of an artist to everything I do, and it encompasses a lot of different things. So I just wanted to be till this day, I still want to be the best artist. I still practice every single day, and, drawing, whatever the case may be. So I just got into design because it was an outgrowth of me being an artist in general.
Wow, man. Sounds like you and I are almost the same because I tend to draw a little bit. I've been doing a lot of it lately. So,
Well, if you draw a little bit, we're not the same. I draw a lot. I do a lot of drawing every single morning for at least an hour. I'll just be practicing either studying anatomy or drawing from photographs or whatever. I used to go to the Art Students League, until we got shut down. I went to the Art Students League, every Friday and took two, they weren't really classes, they were open sketch sessions. But yeah, no, for this, it's like doctors have to practice medicine, right? Artists have to practice art the same way, as far as I'm concerned, with the same degree of seriousness. Although it's fun, I don't have to see a human body and cut it open, but I can draw one, and I'm just having a good time.
awesome. So, what was it about Jim Henson and Sesame Street and the Muppets that you think really, you know, really influenced your design skills? Was it more with puppets? Was it with Jim Henson's animations?
To be honest, it was Jim Henson's generosity because as a kid, learning how to draw and trying to learn different things and find different things. It was hard to understand the deeper things that were going on. Then in 1969, 68, 69, I think it was 69, Jim Henson produced a show called The Muppets on Puppets. I think it came out in 1970, but he did The Muppets on Puppets. He wasn't even really famous yet. He had, Sesame Street had just started when that finally came out. He made it before Sesame Street started. And he told all of his secrets, how he built them, who he worked with, how he did a sketch, and the fabrics, everything. He just cut, and I said, "Oh my gosh!" I was drooling over this thing, and I really wanted to learn more and more about everything he did. And as generous as he was, it was pretty easy to find. As the years went on, you find more and more things about how he did things and who he worked with and what his materials were. He was very generous. Well, I figured that must be all artists are like that. I went around looking and I couldn't find anybody else that was giving that kind of open information so freely and so completely. I mean, he would hold a little bit back, which kept everything mysterious, but for the most part, he laid out the foundation of his entire enterprise, which I thought was great. So because he was so generous, it just fed me and it made me realize, what, being an artist is part of a tribe in a way. And it started with Jim Henson. That's why to this day, whenever I talk about anything about my work, and especially Sesame, but not only Sesame, I talk about Jim Henson because he's one of the most generous people in the world. And because, everybody that I knew, I never got to meet him, but a lot of people said he would have loved you, Louis, which is bittersweet in a big way. But they all say he was always easy to work with, and he'd bring people in and he'd give people an opportunity to work. His generosity is what really triggered everything in me because it created an environment of freedom to know that this giant to me was still a humble person, and showed his mistakes. They showed outtakes and things like that. He was just tremendous, and because of that, it put me in a position of comfort while I was still struggling to get better because I felt I could get better because this man, as great as he is, he showed some of his flaws or some of the things that didn't work. And it made me say, don't worry about what doesn't work. Just keep going until it does work. That's what I got from Jim Henson. So it was really, there's another artist, only one other artist. His name is Norman Rockwell. I'm sure you know who Norman Rockwell is.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm actually on the board of trustees at the Rockwell Museum, and I got to talk there. And of course, I was bragging about the two artists that were the most influential in my life, Jim Henson and Norman Rockwell, and how it came together. I don't know if you've ever seen the drawing I did. I did a drawing of Kermit the Frog looking in the mirror and drawing Jim Henson. It's a pretty popular piece of artwork. You can look it up if you want. It's really, really a good piece. And I did it to get the job at Sesame. When I showed it, they said, "Louis, you already have the job." So it was really a great. So I said, so there's got to be a reason why I did this. Years and years later, when I connected with the Norman Rockwell Museum, I actually did the talk. They saw that drawing in my presentation, and they flipped. They went berserk over that. So I said, I wonder if I can donate it to them. It felt like I was typing the email to the chief, what do you call it in the museum, the person that curator, the senior curator.
Okay.
And Stephanie Plunkett. And as I was writing it, right before I hit the send button, it felt like they already responded because they were so excited about that drawing. So I donated it to them, and they immediately put it up in the museum right away. So I had a drawing up in my favorite illustrator's museum. I went to see it. That's when they offered me the opportunity to become part of the board of directors. I can go on and on about that, but it was Jim Henson and Norman Rockwell together. Those are the two artists that did the most influence. There's another artist. You see a comic book back there. You kind of see the cover. It's Green Lantern, Green Arrow, number 85. I know it's audio, but Neil Adams was also the chief person in my life. I don't know if you know comic books at all, but Neil Adams,
Somewhat.
yeah, he's considered like absolute royalty in comic books. To this day, he still does comic books. He's almost 80. He'll be 80 this year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he doesn't look anywhere near it. He doesn't act anywhere near it either. He's still very youthful, very funny, tough businessman, but a great artist and a great influence. And he hired me when I was only 17 years old because he saw my work and thought it was good enough to join his troupe. So again, those are the three artists. Neil Adams to start with, then Norman Rockwell. But The one that launched everything was Jim Henson when I was only 9 years old. So
Wow, that is incredible. I got to ask you, since you mentioned Norman Rockwell, a friend of the podcast and a friend of mine, Joe Matthew, did this drawing of Grover looking in a mirror and drawing himself in a mirror as a little imitation of Norman Rockwell. Have you ever seen that drawing?
absolutely, I've seen the original. As a matter of fact, when my drawing of Kermit looking in the mirror during Jim Henson was placed in the museum, it was almost right next to Joe's painting. And that was even more of an honor. Yes, wow, my drawing in the Rockwell Museum next to Joe Matthew. It was really a treat.
Wow. Well, hi, Joe, if you're listening.
Hi, Joe. Royalty.
So when you joined Sesame Street, what was your first job?
My first job, well, I freelanced at the very beginning. My very first job, and I remember it so well because I was excited. So many people told me I'd never get this job. Even my college teacher, my hero teacher, told me,
Ouch.
"Yeah, Lewis, you're aiming way too high." I told him I wanted to work for Jim Henson on Sesame Street. So you're aiming way too high. He said, "I believe in you, but you're aiming way too high. Make goals you can actually achieve." But my mother said, "Don't pay attention to that. He doesn't work there. Don't listen." It took me a while to get over that, but I finally did get through with that. But I'm sorry, I kind of lost track there for a second because I got into that story that does kind of grab my mind. What was your question initially?
What was your first job when you started at
Right.
Sesame Street?
Thank you. So I remember it was a company, was it Walmart? I forgot the name of the company, but anyhow, it was a drawing of Ernie that was going to be on the sneaker. Teeny weeny little drawing of, or a black and white drawing of Ernie. It was my very first job, official job for Sesame Street as a freelance artist. But it was the greatest moment in my career up to that moment because I had been trying to get this job. It was a dream that people shot down. And I got it. I got, at least as a freelancer, I got it. So yeah, it was a drawing of Ernie from the side of a sneaker. It was going to be about a half an inch big, if that. And it was the biggest job in the world for me.
That's cute. So were you on set frequently when you started? Like what did you do like more frequently with a lot of the puppet characters besides like drawing on sneakers?
Right, yeah. Well, that was just the first one. It started to elevate from there because people started recognizing my work and they really liked it. As a matter of fact, at one point I did become the exclusive artist. They were bidding for me to be their exclusive artist. A company called Roma International won the bid, and I got a tremendous amount of work. I didn't like the idea at first of working exclusively for one person, one company, but the variety of assignments was so vast that I couldn't believe it. But when I started going to the set, it was because Sesame Street at one point they had Sesame Street around the corner, so they expanded the set back in
Oh
that
yeah.
was a long time ago.
That would have been like 1993 to 98 is when they did that.
Right around there. Very good, very good. You're really awesome, man. So that's
Marty Robinson said to me when he was on the show, "Is there anything you don't know about this?"
and to get a question like that from him is really huge, man. Yeah, you're impressive. But anyway, back
Thank
to
you.
yeah, I went there because we were doing around the corner, and I was on the team of people to start establishing the look, the two-dimensional look of around the corner. So there's a man named Jim May, and he's the one that actually hired me. He was the character artist and art director for both Sesame and Jim Henson Company back then. So he hired me as a freelancer, and he said, "Look, I need you to come with me to the set so we can start to represent what it looks like around the corner because that hasn't been established yet as artwork." And I said, "I get to go to the set," and that was my first. It was going to be my first time. I said, "I can't believe this." It was like blowing up in my mind. But then I said, I have a son. Back then he was about 8 or 9 years old, and I said, Jim, I hate to overextend myself, but would it be possible to bring my son? Because, I told my son everything. He saw all my work, and he really, he was very influential to me as a kid to do children's work, even before I worked for Sesame, to do children's work. I always went to my son to get his opinion. I wanted to bring him to the set with me. And they said, at that point, they didn't really let children visit that often. But he said, "But you know what? Sure, bring him along." So I brought him there, and I walk on the step. And the first thing I see was the sloppy jalopy and Oscar yelling at Maria. And I'm telling you, I couldn't, I just, it was just so much to take in. But it was a beautiful moment. That was the beginning of me practically living on Sesame Street, because after that, there were so many other times I had to go back either to find out new characters that were going to be there. This is long before I was designing the characters. If there was a new character that was going to be there, I had to go get reference, maybe even take some Pantone color swatches so that we'd be able to bring that back to the studio. And I spent a lot of time, at one point I was going constantly. It was like almost living there. So for a little while, I lived on Sesame Street. Actually, I still live there now. I'm just, I'm just kind of hanging here, but I live on Sesame Street. That's where my heart is. Put it that way.
Cute. So how did you get the job that you have now?
Well, it's kind of strange because it's wonderful and it's sad at the same time because this woman named Nancy Stevenson. They wanted someone to be the creative director over character design. We didn't have a creative director of character design at the time. It was quite a few years ago. So they said, no, we need one. And they wanted to make her the creative director. She said, no, no, no. Louis should be the creative director. They said, no, no, no. Because she had been there a lot longer than I had been. I was all for her being the creative director. But she saw that I brought something else to it that other people maybe didn't bring. And she wanted to take advantage of that. I said, Nancy, we can take advantage of that by you leading the charge. And I'll just be here to bring my stuff, to that with you leading. She said, oh, yeah, sure, I can do that. But Nancy had challenges with breast cancer, and she, even though she got past it like 5 different times, the sixth time it kind of took over, and we lost her to that.
Oh.
But there was another person there, Janice Beauchamp, who worked for the Jim Henson Company. Again, she did the Kermit balloon for the Macy's Parade. She did a lot of the toys, a lot of really wonderful stuff. Well, she too succumbed to cancer, and that's when they said, well, Louis, would you go ahead and step in this position? At the time, we didn't know she was dying. And I hate to bring it down, but I'm just being real because look, Sesame Street deals with death. They dealt with Mr. Hooper's death.
Right.
They talk about things in a real way. So I'm talking to you in a real way here. So anyhow, even though people have always thought I should be in that position, I was very happy to slip back and do what I did and let the other people take that position. But they finally ultimately said, Louis, Janice is very sick. We're not sure, how long it's going to take her to come back. Would you step in for her? And I said, absolutely. So I stepped in and I had a whole system I designed just for her so that when she came back, I'd be able to hand it over to her and she wouldn't miss a beat. But she didn't come back. So they said, well, Louis, would you consider, being the creative director? And I said, well, of course I'm going to keep it going. I mean, this means the world to me. I didn't know that every time I got promoted, even before that, I never expected it because I was having such a great time. I was just enjoying it and doing this important work while I was having a great time. So they just kept promoting me. They kept asking me. I never had to ask for a promotion or a raise. They're very good about that, especially under a man named Jeff Dunn. He was the CEO for the last 5 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
He made sure that everybody was compensated properly, and he was really hawk about looking at everything. So I never had to chase, raises and promotions over there. They appreciate the work and they let me know it by putting me in positions where I can show off my best work, doing things I never thought I'd even be able to do, things I never knew I could do, to be honest with you. It's that kind of Sesame Street is still an experiment and we are still learning and growing with it. So every time another opportunity comes up and I get to be right in the middle of it, because we're a character-driven company and we're mission-driven, but the characters are the face of the mission. So what I do is consider, to me anyway, one of the most important jobs because whatever we're saying, it's going to be said through one of these characters, one of my friends. And it's important that the public really cherishes these characters. And we have to be very mindful we have to grow them, but we can't stray too far away from who they are because the people out there in the world let us know if we're moving a little too far. Like when Cookie Monster, they thought he was going to become a vegetable monster and not eat cookies anymore. That was a huge misunderstanding.
I still hear that. Everyone, all of my friends still come to me and they're like, is it true that Cookie Monster's Veggie Monster? And I was like, no, this has been going around for 15 friggin' years. No.
And they even did an episode to try to correct it.
Right. That was a good episode because I remember a friend of mine, like just about a couple of days before, came up to me and he's like, "Do you know Cookie Monster's Veggie Monster?" And I was like, yeah, you're gonna have to watch the upcoming show."
Absolutely. It's just because the characters mean so much to people that any variation would just create this worldwide panic. So we have to, even though we still have to be responsible to grow them with the needs that come up in the world, like with the pandemic, with the social unrest, the government, the politics that's going on, we still have to create tools and materials so that the parents will find ways to help explain these things to their children. Who's going to do that? But Elmo, Cookie, Grover, that's the face behind all the mission. And it's got to be done just right so that people can always rely on Sesame Street to do what we do.
Awesome. I actually did see on Facebook a drawing for in honor of Black History Month of Roscoe Orman, Elena Reed, and Dr. Loretta Long. And for the listeners who don't know, I'm referring to 3 of the original Sesame Street human cast. Roscoe Orman was Gordon, Dr. Loretta Long was Susan, and Elena Reed was a character named Olivia. And if you're my age, you might not remember Olivia. She was Gordon's sister. Did you draw that? It was very good.
Yeah, I sure did. They asked me to do it for Black History Month a few years back. And I said, I want to do something a little bit different. So I did it in stages and had it photographed while I did it. Not while I did it, but as I did parts of it, I would scan it and then continue to draw it. And then the thing is, I actually gave Dr. Loretta her drawing, and I gave one to Roscoe too. Of course, I couldn't give one to Alana Reed. I still have that drawing of her, but it was nice to be able to gift the drawings to the people that it represented.
The people in our neighborhood.
Yeah, exactly. Very good.
So since we're talking about the Muppets and designing, I got to ask you, did you ever get to meet Carolee Wilcox?
I met her briefly. I never got to work with her, but I certainly did meet her, and she was great. It was very, very professional. There was not a lot of like nonsense and playfulness, even though she was sweet and fun. But she was about the work, and she really, really made that clear. And I loved it, because I'm like that too. Even though I'm kind of buoyant and just fun and full of energy and things like that. When I'm responsible for something, I really take it seriously, and sometimes that can rub people the wrong way, not because they don't care. It's because I care so much that sometimes I could go overboard, but I'd rather go overboard and then we can say, all right, let's pull back from here than to be under and then, and let something slip by. So she was like that, I was told. And, I'm sorry I never got to work with her, but I'm grateful that I got to meet her.
And for the listeners who don't know, unless you saw the first few seconds, like that little dedication in the first few seconds of the video, Carolee Wilcox was a Muppet designer, occasional performer, and builder. She just passed away a month ago.
Right.
She built Elmo, the Count, Sherlock, Hemlock, Roosevelt, Franklin, Two-Headed Monster, the Martians. I can't believe I almost forgot the Martians.
You didn't forget them though.
Well, I will say my grandmother, she just passed away not too long ago from Alzheimer's disease. She loved the Martians because my dad and his sister used to watch Sesame Street when it was brand new. And my grandmother's favorites were the Count, Sherlock, Hemlock, the Martians, the Twiddlebugs, Sam the Robot, and the Number Painter.
Wow.
And I will say, if they were to show the Number Painter now on Sesame Street, that guy would probably be in prison.
Because of the code?
No, because he vandalizes places and paints numbers on them without people's permission.
You know what? I enjoyed it so much. I never thought about it as vandalism, but you're absolutely right.
Like when I watch the retro stuff now, I'm looking at this guy and I was like, how has no one called the police on him?
They do have a disclaimer. I don't know if you can still get it. It might be hard to get now, but you can buy DVD sets of the old episodes, but there's a disclaimer.
The old school DVDs, yes.
Yeah, old school, yeah. But there are disclaimers there that this is not meant for educational purposes, just for for nostalgic purposes. Because a lot of things on there shouldn't be done now. And there are kids playing in construction sites, jumping over the wooden horses, and playing near broken, shredded metal. Shouldn't use that as an example of what kids should do, but that's what kids did. I did that when I was a kid. So it's like, yeah, I know what that is. That's telling the truth.
Oh
You
man.
can't you
Yeah.
can't model that behavior, as it's said.
Yeah. The first one came out when I was 7, and I remember seeing the DVD cover. I didn't really exactly know what the heck it was I was looking at. It was just Big Bird, Ernie, Bert, Grover, Oscar, Cookie Monster, and my favorite, Harry. And
Hey, nice.
yeah, and I saw them together, and I was like, oh man, that looks so cool. I didn't really know what old school meant, and then I got it for Christmas that year as a 7-year-old. So I put it in to watch it, and there's the first there's some of the early stuff, and my parents are like, oh, I remember that.
But to you, it was brand new, right?
Yeah, I'd be like, who is that guy? Like my father remembered characters like Harvey Knee Slapper and Roosevelt Franklin, of course, and the number painter, Simon Soundman, Don Music. Another character that probably would not be able to be the way that he used to be now.
Don?
Yeah, because he keeps slamming his head on the piano.
Right, right.
Oh, I'll never finish this song. Never, never, never.
That was Muppet humor. It was okay. You know, if a human did it, that's not good. But use the Muppet, and they got away with a lot more stuff. You know, that's the whole reason to put the Muppets on there, so you could do the wacky stuff.
Mm. So your Muppet character drawings are actually really, really good. You really capture the fur on a lot of these characters. Like I've seen Grover, uh, Hair, Cookie Monster, Oscar, and of course my fave. And you're like the fur texture on it is so well done. Do you ever get advice from any of the Muppet performers on the design of the characters?
No, actually, because it's my job to be the one to design them. So I had to everything. I go to Henson, and I see what they do in the building of the character, and I use that as my understructure. Like the way if I'm watching like someone like Raleigh Crusoe, a master. Raleigh builds pretty much everything, and I get to watch some of what they do. So the foundations all foam rubber, but they're segmented a certain way, and I use that sensibility in my drawing too. I don't just do freehand loose. I mean, sometimes I do if I'm just posing somebody, but once I start doing the actual work, I start to use the construction that's used at the workshop because that keeps it Muppety. That keeps it gives it the flavor of the Muppets constantly. So yeah, so what I do with the Muppeteers, if I'm not just watching, if I ask questions because I want to find out who the character is, more about who they feel the character is. Because you can draw Elmo all you want, but if you draw him sitting down quietly with his hands folded, that's not really Elmo. Elmo is about enthusiasm. He wants to try everything. He wants to explore everything. So the personalities are even more important than the way they look. Now, we have room for interpretation of the characters. So if people do a children's book, they may not look exactly the way, say, a piece of licensing art might look. You know, we try to make the characters look the same wherever they are, whoever's doing it. So we have our how to draw guide and things like that. But no, when I go to the performers, it's to find out the soul of the character, not what they look like. The thing of you talking about those renderings they do with the characters, each character has their own texture of fur. They're not all the same exact fur. You know, there's a lot of care that goes into doing each one of those characters. Grover's fur, even though I don't know if you probably know this, but Grover and Elmo, way back, they were considered cousins. And
I
yeah,
did not know that, but
I got you
wow.
with one. Yeah, that's right. They were
But
cousins.
I can kind of understand that because the other day I was watching an episode of Sesame Street where Grover and Elmo were singing a song together. And I think this was back in the 90s. So I was born in 1999 and I
Right,
watched a lot of new Sesame Street stuff then. And I remember seeing Grover and Elmo together a lot.
right, exactly. So that's probably where they were. I'm not sure if they actually articulated it, but I know that was a big deal at the time for me learning about the characters. I was reading everything. So yeah, so when I do the photo shoots, I'm in there and I'm really careful to look at. I even use it for like I did a photograph of Grover running, and he's running like all a full out run. And I used even though it's a still image, I used his fur, and I would comb it backwards to make it look like his hair was flying. and it really lent a lot of animation to the image. It looks like he's really moving. You know, he's as still as you could possibly get, but I'm adding that animation, all those little details. And in all those things, I study the fur to see what I can't do that with every character, but I can do with most of them.
Mhm.
And so, because I'm so intimately involved with handling them so closely, that when I start drawing them, I draw the style of the fur the way I know it actually is. And that's where I learned how to draw the fur, because looking at the way the builders, because they get the fur and it's this straight raw fur. You know, Riley Cruson told me there's all kind of techniques of heat, and I think oils, a lot of different things that she has to do to give Elmo his particular texture of fur. Where Grover doesn't get that same kind of thing. You know, a Cookie Monster has a whole other kind of fur. They all have their own. So just being that intimately close to them and using them and imposing them, like I said in my still performance, I get such a close look at them. So it gives me the chills every single time. There are moments during a photo shoot, almost even when I'm drawing, where I kind of get choked up. You know, I've been doing this for a long, long, long time. And it's to this day, it's still like a dream come true. You know, I can't wait to get to my right now working from home, but I know when I get here, it's gonna be to work on Sesame. I do a lot of my own projects too, but I know I'm gonna do Sesame projects and I never know what's gonna come to me. It's always brand new. Like I said, it's always an experiment.
Wow. Well, it's funny that you were talking about the fur on the Muppets, because as you were saying that, I noticed something. Elmo's fur, is very shaggy and long. Harry's fur is all straight up and long. Grover's is kind of short and slicked back and a little and somewhat long. Almost, I'd say about the length of my hair, maybe.
Yeah, it's
Um,
kind of long. So.
well, maybe not the length, but the type.
Yeah,
Oscar's, very shaggy and curly. Cookie Monster's is probably the shortest fur I have ever seen on any of the Muppets. I never realized that until you brought it up.
pretty cool. That's a good point. Actually Elmo's is shorter, but Cookie's so much bigger. It seems short on him.
Ah,
Yeah,
wow.
I love working with that photo Muppet, because some of them have, most of them have photo Muppets where it's a because that way they're doing the show. I can be doing a photo shoot while they're taping the show just a few blocks away. And so with Cookie Monster, that particular photo Muppet, the full body one, because we have a full body one and we have a half body one. If there's a big crowd of Muppets, I use the half body one because the full body one is really full. He's really big. His stomach is full of cookies, so he's really big and round. But if I have to do his arm in front of his body, the blues can really kind of hide it. It almost camouflages his hand because it's right in front of his body. So what I do is, I mean, of course, the lighting is a big deal, but what I can do is I can brush his fur on his tummy and his chest area. If I brush it backwards, it actually changes the way the fur catches the light, and it looks like it's darker. And I can use almost like I'm painting with the actual fur texture on Cookie Monster's body. Then I can do that, I think, a little bit with Rosita. I don't think of anybody else I can do that. Maybe the two-headed monster, I think so.
Hmm.
But Cookie's my favorite anyway, so I just spend a lot of time thinking about him.
That was going to be my next question. What if you had a favorite Muppet to do photo shoots for?
Um, let's see, to do shoots for. I mean, I love doing shoots with all of them. I mean, whoever's on the set, I'm in awe of the opportunity to do that. But as far as my favorites go, it is Cookie Monster. To me, he's the greatest character of all time anyway.
I will say I did hear a really cool story from you about the about using Kermit on the cover of a DVD, and I really liked hearing that.
And that was amazing, I'm not sure how much you heard of the story. Would you like me to recount it a little bit?
Sure, yeah, for our listeners, of course.
Yeah, sure. So anyway, we were doing a DVD cover called Silly Story Time. And it featured a lot of the fairy tale segments, where Kermit was the reporter interviewing the characters from these famous fairy tales. And the thing is, of course, at that point, Kermit belonged to Disney, which was Jim Henson's intention. A lot of people feel really bad about that or uncomfortable with it, but it was his intention, to sell to Disney. So anyhow, well, not to get into all that stuff, but anyway, So, but Disney owned Kermit. So we said, you know what? Kermit is in every single one. The only Muppet that's in every segment is Kermit. We got to see if we can get him for the cover. So I said, well, yeah, we should try to do that. So, we reached out and to Disney, and they said no immediately. They said, no, no, Kermit belongs here now, and we don't want to confuse the market. I didn't like that answer because he didn't start on Sesame Street, but he became really famous on Sesame Street. So I said, you know what? Let me try again. I must have written maybe 3 or 4 letters. The last one I got back was from the lawyer saying, we will not release Kermit the Frog to you. Please, it was sort of a cease and desist letter, but it wasn't like, a big, heavy legal cloud. They just told me I was never going to get Kermit the Frog. They did not want to confuse the market because the movie, the actual first new Muppet movie was going to be coming out. I think that
Yes.
you
That was an awesome movie.
like. I'm such a purist that there are things about it that made me feel a little reticent, but it was still great to see them back. That's for sure. Anyway, so I felt bad because we were going to try to have to do the DVD cover without Kermit, and I said, no, this doesn't make any sense. So I wrote one more letter, but this time instead of making it some professional letter, I wrote it by hand. And I went to Henson and said, look, you know who at Disney can take this letter and give it in the right hand so that somebody will hear what I'm trying to say. We're not, there was a big span of time between when our DVD was going to come out and when that Muppet movie was going to be released. So I said there won't be any problem, and everybody knows Kermit, was made famous on Sesame Street. So anyhow, I gave a letter, and I said, I'm probably not going to get any progress with this, but I had to try because it really meant a lot to me. So and normally I don't. These days it's different, but normally I don't check my email, my work email on weekends. But it happened to be his son's birthday that day. So I got home, and after we took him to his favorite restaurant, I said, I got to check. Maybe I got a word about Kermit. I hope it's a good word. When I opened the email, sure enough, they released Kermit and said, yes, we understand now there's going to be a big difference. I forgot exactly what it was. I have the letter somewhere, but they said, we're going to release Kermit to you and you can use him for this thing. So I was really excited about that. So the day came. Now we were doing a 2-day shoot. The first day was on Thursday, and we were doing a shoot for another DVD. But Kermit was going to be arriving that day so that we could do the photo shoot on Friday. So we were waiting for Kermit to come, and he didn't show. He was supposed to be around 3:00. No, about 1:00. So 1:00 came, he didn't show up. But again, FedEx, who knows, things can happen all the time. 2:00 came, no Kermit. 3:00 came and no Kermit, and we were starting to get a little concerned. And the art director, his name is Len Forgione, he was actually the art director back then who did the design on the cover. He was kind of getting concerned because it was his idea to ask, and he felt really bad. So I said, no, you know what? It took a long time and a lot of work to finally get approval to use him. I know he's going to show up at some point. But that wasn't enough for Len. He actually got up. We didn't even know when he got up and he left the studio. He went out to look for Kermit. Now, where in the world are you going to look? We called FedEx, and FedEx said, no, he was delivered. We delivered him. They didn't know it was Kermit. We delivered that package with that tracking number. So, well, where did you deliver it? He's not here. So, there was a bit of a panic. But I said, no, I know he's going to show up somehow. So anyhow, Len was walking around the neighborhood. We didn't even realize that, trying to see if we could find Kermit. About halfway down the block of the carriage house where we used to shoot was one of the Fox television stations. And they have this giant open bay where they receive all their packages because they get tons of stuff from FedEx. As Len was passing by there, he knew, not only a Muppet person would know, so you would know if you saw it probably, but anyhow, he looked and he saw a case that looked a little odd. So he asked the security guard, sir, could you please check the address on that particular box? And he went and looked and said, well, this isn't ours. This doesn't belong here. He showed him his ID. He was able to get the package. He came back and was holding it up over his head like Hercules. So I found Kermit. We couldn't believe he actually found Kermit. So we had to shoot the next day, and it was one of the greatest days of my life because, again, when I was a kid, it was Kermit the Frog and Jim Henson holding Kermit, no, having Kermit on his arm that triggered me into this wonder world. And now to have Kermit in my hands, it was like a full circle experience that just, it's indescribable what that moment was for me. And I even, there's a picture of me. I don't know if you go, I think we're Facebook friends, I'm not sure, but
Yep.
there's a picture on Facebook where you dig deep enough, you see me, I'm smiling and I'm holding, I think I'm holding Kermit's hands or something. And I right at that moment, I said, nobody pinch me because I'm in my zone because I said, I'm with Kermit. It has got to be a dream. And then I said, wait a minute, this isn't a dream, it's real. Go ahead and pinch me. Everybody came up at once and pinched me. I didn't care because I was with Kermit the Frog, man, in
Oh.
his outfit, his hat, his the trench coat, his microphone. Oh, thanks for bringing that back. Because I love telling that story because it just brings back such fond memories.
I have a VHS copy of, and I showed it in a Nostalgia Talk bonus video, as I call it, where I do these little, like, sometimes it's like clip shows of past episodes. Sometimes I haven't done this yet, but I'm planning on bringing back past guests sometime for like some fun, not an interview, but fun.
Right. What?
Just, or I'll just showcase something retro that I have. So I have a Kermit the Frog doll that I brought up when I was talking to Ivy Austin, and I thought to myself, oh, crap, I don't have it on the table with me. So I did a little showcase of it, and I showed tape I have, The Best of Kermit on Sesame Street.
Nice. Very nice.
Have you ever seen that one?
I think I actually have it, but not. I think they re-released it as a DVD, but not the VHS.
Oh man, I didn't know they re-released it as a DVD. I'll have to check that out. Now, were you there when they for the 50th anniversary special when Kermit was singing with Elvis Costello?
Sure was. I was on the set, man. I have to admit, my eyes were streaming because, again, so proud of Matt Vogel to step into the two of the most significant. Well, Kermit is the most significant of all the Muppets, but for him to step in and do what he was able to do, it just astounded me. But to be on a set when Kermit came back, I believe Cheryl Henson was there. I mean, it was a big deal. And they didn't let a lot of people on there, but I was grateful that I was allowed to be on there. And it was just a sweet moment. Because Elvis Costello, I had met him a couple of times before that, but and he's a sweet man too. So all that coming together at that moment was just divine, just divine.
Speaking of Elvis Costello, so first of all, my father's really into Elvis Costello. My mother's name is Allison. And so
Oh, nice.
every time the song Allison by Elvis Costello plays on the radio when I'm with my dad, he just starts singing it because it reminds him of my mother.
That's
And
great.
for the listeners who don't know, Elvis Costello is married to somebody who Ivy brought up on the show before, Diana Krall. Were you there when Diana Krall was on Sesame Street?
Not when she was on Sesame Street, but when we did there was one of the Christmas specials, and Elvis Costello was on there. But they all came because they had the twin babies, and the babies
Aw,
were there. So Diana Cole was there, the babies were there, and Elvis was there to do his part. But I got to see the entire family. It was really beautiful.
that's nice. So at the start of the video where you were talking a little bit about the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, which is one of my dreams. Like I'm in Nova Scotia, Canada. We don't really get big parades like they do in New York. Like every time I'm in downtown Halifax, it just feels like a really small New York, basically, except not as busy. Uh, There's still, I just like to go to the shops most of the time. The best day of my life was actually when my best friend was in town and we just spent a whole day going to the shops on Spring Garden Road in Halifax.
Oh, I love
And
Canada. I haven't been a lot, but I've been. Well, the Toronto Film Festival was really a cool thing to go to. But yeah, it's nice.
mm, yeah, I love to go to New York and see the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Every time I hear that there's the Sesame Street float, I always tape it, or if I'm not in class, I watch it online. Because I think they live stream it too. So you said that you designed the current float that they have.
Yeah.
There was one that I was really impressed with. It kind of looked like 123 Sesame Street in Elmo's World. Did you design that one too?
No, I didn't design that one. That was the basic one that we used. So it was already painted. And then they asked me to revamp that one. They were trying to expand beyond. I mean, of course, Elmo's World was such a big hit, but they wanted the float to represent a little bit more of a broader vision of Sesame Street. So I did a variation on that same float. I think I did a whole bunch of children's faces. I think I did maybe 2 or 3 different versions on that same float, but then they wanted a completely different float for the 35th anniversary. And that's when they wanted me to start from scratch. So yeah, I didn't design the Elmo's World one, but I did take that and convert it to 2 other versions before designing the brand new float. Not brand new, but it's the same float they've been using forever. It's brand new to me because I love seeing it. I don't, of course, last Thanksgiving Day parade, we didn't have it because of all this happening in the world. You know, the pandemic kind of prevented it, but they had video greetings from the character from the Muppets, but the float itself didn't go. But the year before that, not only did the float appear, but Julia, I think, made her premiere on the her feature premiere on the float. And I designed Julia, I designed the float, and it's like these worlds come together. I get so excited, man. It's just the dream. It's not just a dream; it's the reality. The dream came true and became a reality. So that's one of the things I love to share with not just young people but anybody. Don't give up on your dreams, because dreams are not they're not fantasies, they're seeds. If you plant them properly and you take care of them, they will sprout and grow into what they're supposed to be. You know, that's how I feel.
Wow. Now, was the alphabet fence on that float your idea as well?
No, that was actually, I believe, oh, I can't remember the person's name that came up with that idea, which is a beautiful touch. I was for me the challenge was trying to sell the idea, because if you notice the float, there are no real right angles on it. It's like one camp came to me and said, we want to remember where we came from, and the other camp said, no, we want to think about where we're going. So that's right, Louis, you put that together. Think about where we came from and where we're going. You put it together into one float. So I said, well, how do I do that? So I took the old building and designed it in a new way. So I said, all right, that's the past and the future combined into one. So if you look at it, it's like it's reaching into the future. The brownstone it's like bending forward. It's like spreading out as you go up. It's not straight up and down. And Macy's told me it was very difficult for them. They didn't want to do it that way because they said, we've never done a float like this before. And if we're not careful, we may not have a float this year for the 35th anniversary.
Ooh.
So I said, oh my gosh, this could be my job if I don't get this right. But I said, no, there's got to be a way to do it. They told me they had to invent tools to do what I asked them to do. So anyhow, and the one most special thing on there is that, whenever you have a company logo, you're not supposed to adjust or change that logo in any way, shape, or form. But I had the street sign, and everything else had this tapered view reaching out to the future. And I said, the street sign itself has to do the same thing. And people, oh, no, you can't do that to the streets. And I said, if we don't do it to the sign, it's going to look a mistake. Everything's going to have that same, reaching out for the future. So they said, well, it's all right. Well, so they gave me permission to alter the logo, the famous Sesame Street sign. If you look at that float, you'll see the sign is stretched, just like every other part of it. And I was I was nervous about it, but I was very grateful and very humbled by their accepting my vision, my complete vision for that float. So yeah,
it's a lot like in 3D video games or on Google Maps when if you're on Google Maps when you're kind of looking at a place that's a little farther away and it's kind of stretched out toward you.
Yeah, like a fisheye lens in a way. Yeah.
Mm. So apart from Elvis Costello and Diana Krall, are there any other celebrities that you've been on the set of Sesame Street for when they've been there?
Oh yeah, a whole bunch of them. I'll tell you 2 of them.
Okay.
Let's see. Sarah Jessica Parker was on there once, and she was adorable because she had a daughter at the time, and her daughter was on the set of Sesame Street with the Muppets, everybody all around, but her daughter was like playing with, I think, her doll, and just kind of having a good time. But Sarah Jessica Parker was running around like she was 4 years old, looking at the puppets, talking to everybody, talking to the characters, and she was like ecstatic about being on Sesame Street. She had been there before, but it's like the celebrities come on and they get excited. Um, One time I was there and I love to tell this story because it's just cool. I was hanging out in Mr. Hooper's store and I was talking to one of our interns. And just that by itself was cool because I was hanging out at Mr. Hooper's store. Then that was the day that Adam Sandler was going to be on the show. And I had done the storyboards for his segment. So I was there just to be able to support if they needed new boards, if they needed something added or whatever. Anyhow, I'm standing by the Hooper store. That's way across on the other side from the entrance on the set. So as he comes on, he passes the executive producer, he passes the performer, the director, and he comes right to me and says, "Hi, I'm Adam Sandler." And he puts his hand out and shakes my hand and says, "Hi, I'm Louis Mitchell. Nice to meet you." And then he walks off to go speak to the director and said, "I didn't understand that. For a couple of years, I didn't understand. Why did he come to me?" Then it dawned on me later on when we used to have to wear our ID badges on the outside. We still do for the most part, but I didn't want to just wear it on the clip. So I had this big Cookie Monster. I had done the artwork and they made a badge holder out of it. And on one side was Cookie Monster's face, and the other side was the pocket for the clear plastic pocket for our ID badge. That particular day, it dawned on me because of the way I wore it, Cookie Monster's face would always be facing forward, and you'd have to turn it around to see my ID badge. So that day when he came on set, it was Cookie's face that was showing. So I assume he thought I was the guy who performed Cookie Monster. He came right to me and, "Hey, I'm Adam Sandler." And that was it. So it was really exciting. Oh, one other really cool one. I had to direct a photo shoot for all the famous fashion designers. And everybody was connected. There was, I think, Diane von Furstenberg and Vera Wang. And my favorite was Oscar de la Renta. He's a really big name in fashion. And so I was directing the whole shoot. I had the sketches and all that for them to approve. So I'm on the set and I'm waiting for him to come out. And I was probably most excited about him because his, to me, was the most famous of all the names. So he comes and he has maybe about, I don't know, 20, 30 people with him. He has a whole entourage. And he's got this beautiful suit. The suit must have been like a $10 million suit. Who knows? But the thing is, he comes. It happens to virtually every celebrity that I've seen. They go on the set. He steps on, he looks around. Is that really Mr. Hooper's store? And is that really the Sesame Street building? And then Elmo comes on. He's, "Oh my goodness, Elmo!" And he turns into a kid. This is Oscar de la Renta, one of the most famous and wealthiest and popular fashion designers. He turns into a 3-year-old right on the set because when he sees the set and because when you're on the set, it doesn't look like a set unless you look up. But it looks like a street. It looks just like a regular street. And it was just so exciting to see him get excited like that. So yeah, there were a few others, but those were the ones that stand out the most. I love it. I love it.
Joey Mazzarino puts it best when he says that when you walk on the set of Sesame Street for the first time, you become a 5-year-old instantly.
Yes. Perfect, Joey.
And also for the listeners who were hearing Lewis's story about Adam Sandler assuming that he was the performer of Cookie Monster, if you're wondering from me, because if you're a friend of mine listening to this podcast, then you probably know that there's a good chance I know who does Cookie Monster. The puppeteer who does Cookie Monster's name is David Rudman. He's also Baby Bear, Sully, Humphrey, one of the halves of the two-headed monster. And for the Muppets franchise, he does Scooter, Janice, Beaker, and Bobby Benson. And he also created a show that some of you probably might have grown up with, Jack's Big Music Show. And David, if you're listening to this, I would love to have you on my show.
Oh man, that's going to be a good one.
Yeah,
I love that. He's so cool.
Yeah, I've never actually met him personally, but I would love to someday. That would be awesome.
I love him when you do. When you get to me, I'm sure he'll have no problem being on the show. He's such a sweetheart. But don't forget, the originator of Cookie Monster was Frank Oz. He's the one that did the original Cookie Monster. So.
Right. Yeah, and for the listeners who don't know, I mean, my friend Brian listens to the podcast a lot. He's a Star Wars kid, so he knows if Frank Best is Yoda. But for the listeners who only know if Frank Oz is Yoda, Frank is also Miss Piggy, Fozzie, Animal, Sam the Eagle, Bert, and Grover, and he's also one of my idols as a film director too.
Great man, really great man. Just a quick story about Frank. Um, you know, whenever anyone like Frank Oz would show up on the set, don't talk to him. You're not allowed to talk to Frank and this and that, all that stuff. Anyhow, I was on the set and someone said, Louis, Frank is coming to the set. Would you do? Because I do a lot of portraits for, like either thank you portraits or congratulatory portraits. I'm like the official portrait artist at Sesame Workshop. So I basically, would you do a portrait of Frank to kind of just give it to him as a gift? I said, yeah, if I had permission, because I thought we were supposed to even interact with him. So I did a drawing of Frank Oz with Bert and Grover and Cookie. And a big drawing of him and a big OZ. It was really a cool image. Anyhow, I went there and the time came for me to give it to him. And I presented it to him and he's like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. Oh, this is amazing. I said, well, gee, thanks, Mr. Oz. No, call me Frank. Call me Frank. This is magnificent. And his response was so warm and genuine. And I said, everybody makes him out to be. I know the thing is, he's such a consummate professional that he's having fun. But when it comes time to do the work, he is on point, and he's making sure everybody's on point. And not just with the Muppets, but as he's directing and everything. But in this particular case, with the Muppets, everybody felt no, he's very, very serious. You can't. He's a sweet, warm guy, and love the drawing I did for him. So it made me think, you know what? I did this thing called the Tribe Session. It was that kind of precursor because I'm developing an art school, a very unique art school that I want to launch. I was supposed to launch it last year, but you know what happened. But anyway, I'm still working on it now. And I had this little like a think tank that I call the Tribe Session. Just a bunch of artists that got together. And different, even if you weren't into art, like you were a creative lawyer or an accountant, anybody was welcome to come and just kind of meet each other. It was a really nice little thing we had going on for 3 years. Anyhow, I said, I want to tell Frank it, but maybe he'll come and be a guest. I don't know. Of course, people told me, oh, he'll never do anything like that. So I went up and he was doing Cookie Monster. Of course, I wasn't having because seeing the original Cookie Monster performer doing Cookie Monster, taking nothing away from David Rudman, who was a magnificent Cookie Monster. Anyhow, so Frank's in Hooper Store doing Cookie Monster. And as soon as they cut, normally he waits for the wrangler to take the puppet off, but he kind of took Cookie off his arm and threw him on the counter in Hooper Store and ran back out and picked up the drawing that he had left on the side of the stoop. And he's just standing there looking at it. So I said, this might be a good time to go and tell Frank what I want to do. So I said, Frank, I do this thing called the Tribe Sessions, and it's just a bunch of creative people coming, to talk to each other. And I know you're busy, you're directing movies, and at that time he was only coming maybe once a year to do Sesame Street. So I said, would you consider maybe being a special guest speaker? And he said, well, tell me a little bit more about it, because he was really into the drawing. So I said, this is a great chance. So he's tell me more about it. So I told him a little bit more about it. He said, you know what, Louis? I not only want to do this, I think I have to do it. So I tell you what, he tore, this is great, and I still have it with me. He tore a piece of the script off and he wrote his email address. So here's my email address. And if you have any trouble getting by email, here's my home number in Connecticut. He wrote that on a torn piece of the script. And he gave it to me and I said, everybody said he was going to be hard, and he was the sweetest, generous man. I mean, just so sweet. And then we worked it out, and every now and then he would either email me or he'd call me a couple of times and say, Louis, you know what? Is it okay if I do this? And I said, Frank, you can do whatever you want. No. I want to follow whatever it is you do. I want to be respectful, which I couldn't believe. So he said, I want to do this and that. I said, yeah, sure, Frank, that's fine. Then he calls me again. He says, no, Louis, another day. Because he's thinking about this. It means so much to me that he was putting so much thought into coming to visit us. So he says, no, Louis, can you get a Grover for me? I said, I'm sure I can. He said, don't tell anybody. I'm not sure I'm going to do this or not. But see if you can get a Grover for me. I said, okay. So I went to Henson on the day, and I had Grover. I didn't say anything to anybody. I had him in a bag. little secret bags that only Muppet people know about.
Mm-hmm.
So he's giving his presentation. He comes out and I introduce him to everybody. They clap for way too long. He starts yelling at them. Will you please sit down? I got to start talking at some point. So and it was beautiful. So at a certain point, he did ask me to, he said, I have Grover here. So I went and got Grover, gave it to him. He did the most beautiful presentation because he said, puppets is not about wiggling a doll in front of a camera. Puppetry is an art form. It's a form of acting that requires you to put your entire performance into your hand. Even if you may be emoting with your face or your body, you've got to put that into the puppet. So he says, I'm going to demonstrate it with Grover. He took Grover. So first he did Grover, of course, and he called one of the people in the audience who happened to be a student of mine that was at the School of Visual Arts when I taught there, who I didn't even know Grover was her favorite character of all time, and he didn't know either. But he calls her up, and Grover's talking to her, and she's standing there like she was like a deer in headlights. And Grover's trying to, are you okay? I'm not trying to do his voice, but he, does the cat have your tongue? Different thing, he's riffing off of her. And he's okay, well, you can go back and sit down. And it was the sweetest moment. Then Frank said, now I'm going to show you something. He turns Grover into a dog. He started barking and everything. And the thing is, it's still Grover. He didn't put ears or any he just took Grover and turned him into a dog without changing anything except the performance. And all you saw was a dog. You didn't see Grover anymore. Then he turned Grover into this shy little scared child. And he's looking around, why is everyone staring at me? And you wanted to cry for this poor little, it's still Grover with the same red lip, the pink, the purpley pink nose, big eyes, but you didn't see Grover anymore. Obviously, it was a proof that it's all about the performance. And Grover turned into that little boy. Then he went back to Grover, and then he opened it up for questions. I don't want to go too far into this because I don't want to eat up all the time. But it was a really, really great, great time. And Frank was so generous to spend time with us like that and really show the art of puppetry in a way I had never experienced it before. To take the same character and one of the most famous characters in the world and turn them into two other characters that didn't seem at all like the original. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. So he's just brilliant.
Wow. So before we wrap up, you designed as you mentioned at the start, you designed the Muppet character Julia, the first ever Muppet with autism. And I had heard that you also co-designed, is it pronounced Kami or Kami?
I've heard both. I think it's Kami, but I hear
Okay. And for anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about, Kami is a character from the South African, almost said South American, South African co-production of Sesame Street, and is also the first ever Muppet with HIV AIDS.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about the, go ahead.
It's called Takalani Sesame, that particular.
Right, I was never able to pronounce it. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that those characters have had? Because they've gotten pretty far.
Yeah, no. I mean, Kami was really a real big breakout character for us because again, Sesame was never afraid to deal with real life issues. And it was really the idea from the people in South Africa that said, we want to address this. And the thing is, people over here in America got offended. They thought we were making fun of people who have HIV and AIDS by making a Muppet. It wasn't really the idea. It was the idea of the people of South Africa to find a way to help children understand that you can't get AIDS by hugging someone and just try to dispel some of it was just a terrible situation. And it was running rampant so horribly over there. They said, look, we've got to put this on the show. And of course, Sesame Workshop in America agreed. At first, I think there was some hesitancy, but we said, we see what you want to do and we understand, so we'll support that. The media here went berserk. We even had, we had to evacuate the building because we got a bomb threat.
Oh.
Yeah, at Sesame Workshop in America on Broadway. We got a bomb threat. And we got hate mail and all kind of stuff. The media was going berserk. And they just didn't get the whole story. They reacted instead of responding. They should have found out what we were doing. Kami was going to be in the South African co-production, not in the American production of Sesame Street. And they didn't understand it. They just started to react. So anyhow, it finally got to the place where people understood what we were actually doing and that it actually was the desire and the idea of the people in South Africa to help people understand, the different things that are going on over there when it concerns HIV and AIDS. And again, it's very, very successful. To this day, she's still, it's been a long time now that she's been, maybe, what, 12 years, maybe? I'm not sure, maybe even more than that.
I think
But
so. I remember her on the Sesame Street website as a 3 or 4 year old. That was about almost 20 years ago.
was it that long? Wow. Yeah,
Well,
well,
from my memory anyway.
you
Maybe
know,
I'm totally
you're
wrong.
right. Yeah, it's hard to keep track of all these specific details and everything like that, but because we're doing so many things. And with Julia, the response from the community is to this day, it's just tremendous. Now, of course, at first when Julia came out, she was not supposed to be a Muppet. She was going to be a character in a book. And because the fortunate thing was for me, a friend of mine, Rachel London Carter, was an intern at Sesame who worked with children on the spectrum and their families. And she said, Louis, you'd be great to work with them. I said, but I wouldn't want to cause any disruption in their progress. He said, no, 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 you just have to love them. So I said, well, I can do this. I love kids. Anyhow, I went and I volunteered. And thanks to her, I was able to bring all this experience. I didn't even know Sesame was working on an autism project. But when they came to me to design her, I said, wow, now I know why this happened. So I was able to bring all that experience to her. And, you know, I, but again, I felt good that we were only going to do her as an illustrated character and not actually a Muppet at the beginning. Because when you talk about behaviors, different, everybody has their own different behavior for different reasons, and you can't represent all of that with one character. So she just illustrated the minute you talk about behaviors, everybody can interpret it to the way they experience behaviors. But she was so popular and so well received that what the senior creative person at Sesame at the time decided, you know what, she needs to be on the show. We need to make a Muppet. And I didn't like the idea at first because I said, you know what, we can't represent the whole spectrum with one character. And then they said, no, we're not representing the spectrum. We're pointing to it. We're bringing attention to it. On Sesame Street, one of the most famous shows in the world, people are going to start to pay attention to autism in a different way. I said, well, I can definitely get behind that. So I started doing the sketches and worked very closely with the Jim Henson Company. And it was difficult because, again, Raleigh Crusoe is the Muppet building master. And she told me that I was asking her to do things she had never done in her at the time, over 40 years worth of Muppet building. But I needed Julia to have a different look. So I angled her eyes differently. If you look at Julia, you see her nose is very subtle. When you look at a character, the story has begun the minute you look at the character. Because character design is not drawing characters, it's communicating through the characters and telling a story. Even before you start drawing a character, you're designing the character before you put pencil to paper. Anyhow, one of the things I wanted to show was, because I worked with a child on the spectrum, and she's a brilliant little girl. And I always thought of her as a kind of a diamond in the rough. So I gave Julia a little diamond-shaped nose. It's very subtle, but I put it in there, again, just hinting at that diamond in the rough idea. The other thing I really wanted to do was because Julia was not going to be relating Dorothy to the camera, the way, when the show comes up and say Elmo's on there, he says, oh, hi, welcome to Sesame Street. Julia was never going to do that. I said, but I needed to make her immediately relatable. What do I do to do that? Because, yeah, she's a Muppet, but she's got to be immediately accepted, right away, because she's never going to make that interaction. So I said, if I give her human texture hair, even if it's an unusual color, that's going to make her look warm like a real little girl, and you'll embrace her immediately in your heart. There was a bit of resistance because they didn't want her to be a departure from the Muppet world. Give her ostrich feather hair, maybe yarn. I mean, there were other characters like Prairie Dog have human texture hair, but this was going to be a very big mop of hair. And I said, no, I think I want to do that. So there was a lot of resistance, but ultimately I was able to get through to them and they understood, and it worked perfectly. So now the community has been writing to us. And even though there are things that maybe the community, the autism community, felt that maybe we weren't addressing properly, the thing about Sesame Workshop is we're always listening. The greatest thing that we do, I think, is listen. Because when there's a need out there, Sesame Workshop will pay attention and say, well, how can we help the parents to navigate through this wilderness and share ideas so that the children who may see that, or may be experiencing something, they'll give them tools to help the children understand a little bit more, maybe to comfort them. If they don't understand, they'll be comforted at least. So that was a big deal with Julia. And Again, I was at the Norman Rockwell Museum for a meeting, and this family came up to me because they found out that I was there, and I think I was going to do that talk. They found out I was there, and they said they had their daughter who was on the spectrum, and they said, we just want to thank you so much. We love Julia. We think she's wonderful, and our daughter's an artist, and she showed me drawings that she did of Julia, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful moment to hear directly from the people that you're reaching out to get that direct feedback is better than gold.
That's amazing. So, Louis, that's all I have on the Q&A. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, please keep watching Sesame Street. No matter how old you get, it's still for you. Don't ever stop watching the Sesame Street. Watch the Muppets, and just be good to each other, please.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories with me and with the listeners. And to the listeners, first of all, sorry it's been a little while since I've done Nostalgia Talk. The week I was doing the show with Chris Surf was very busy, and I just needed a week to just recharge my batteries. So I've been working on more Nostalgia Talk bonus videos that'll be coming soon. I actually just heard from Paul Rudolph today. He's going to be coming on the show in March, and I'm really looking forward to that. And if you don't know who Paul Rudolph is, he's Sesame Street's vocal director. So if you've got any questions, just send me a message, and hopefully I'll have some more guests coming up. So until then, peace.